Here is your story, 3,000 words, no headings, clean and complete. Ilara had learned, in 18 months of marriage, how to smile at the right moment. It was a small skill. An invisible one. The kind of thing no one teaches a woman directly, they simply reward her for it, again and again, until it becomes as natural as breathing. A smile when the guests arrived. A smile when Aldrich told the same story about his grandfather's horse for the 4th time that season. A smile when Mira Beaumont crossed a room and Aldrich's eyes followed her the way a compass needle finds north, helpless, precise, inevitable. Ilara smiled then too. She had a gift for it. The Voss country estate sat at the northern edge of the family's land, and in autumn it became something magnificent and cold, stone walls the color of old silver, gardens that had given up their color and settled into bare honest shapes, and sky so wide and gray it made everything underneath it feel small. Ilara had come to love it. She had not expected to. She had not expected much about this life to suit her, and in that she had been largely correct. But the estate, the particular silence of it, the way frost came in the night and left its writing on the windows, that she had claimed for herself. She stood before the mirror in her dressing room on the Thursday evening that everything changed, and she was, to her own eye, exactly what was required. Hair arranged. Dress pressed. The pearl earrings Aldrich's mother had given her at the wedding, because they were the Voss women's tradition, and tradition in this family moved in one direction and did not ask your preference. She put them on. She looked at her own face. She thought, one more evening. She had been thinking that for 18 months. The guests had been arriving since midday, a dozen families whose names Ilara had memorized within her first month of marriage, not because she found them interesting but because knowing people's names was armor. You could not be caught off guard by someone whose grandmother's maiden name you already knew. Lord Haddon Voss arrived with his wife and the particular expression he always wore at these gatherings, which was the expression of a man who believes he has been wronged by the universe and is waiting patiently for the universe to apologize. He was Aldrich's elder brother. He had expected, for most of his adult life, to be the one who controlled the family trust. The marriage, Ilara's marriage, her particular marriage to Aldrich, had complicated that expectation considerably. She had understood this from the beginning. She had understood a great many things from the beginning that she was not supposed to understand. Aldrich found her in the entrance hall as the last of the carriages arrived, and he touched the small of her back and said, "You look wonderful," and she said, "Thank you," and they stood together, and every person in that entrance hall saw a handsome couple in a good marriage, and Ilara thought, yes. That is the performance. And we are both very good at it. Dinner was what dinners at the Voss estate always were, long, and carefully managed, and full of conversation that meant something slightly different from what it said. Haddon spoke about the estate's founding as though he were the one who had maintained it. Aldrich's mother spoke about the family's future as though she were describing a weather forecast, something inevitable and not open for discussion. Mira Beaumont sat 3 seats down from Aldrich and spoke to the men on her left for most of the meal, and Ilara watched, because Ilara always watched, and understood that this too was a performance, the studied absence of eye contact between two people who knew each other very well. She ate her dinner. She smiled at the right moments. She answered questions about the estate's gardens, which she had actually improved considerably since her arrival, and received compliments on this that no one intended to be as faint as they were. After dinner the party moved to the drawing room, and fires were lit, and wine was poured, and Ilara stood near the window and listened to Lady Haddon describe a health treatment she had tried in the south, and felt the particular exhaustion that comes not from activity but from sustained pretending. Her head had begun to ache. This was not unusual. She excused herself, a headache, she told Lady Haddon, which was not entirely untrue, and slipped out of the drawing room and into the east corridor, moving toward the library. She had always found the library useful in the way that empty rooms are useful, they ask nothing of you. You can simply be in them, and that is enough. The east corridor bent at a small anteroom that sat beside Aldrich's private study. She had walked this corridor perhaps 200 times in 18 months. She knew the way the floorboards behaved, the particular creak near the third door, the cold that came in through the window at the end regardless of the season. She was perhaps 4 steps from the anteroom when she heard her name. Not Aldrich's voice. Myra's. She stopped. She did not mean to stop. Her feet simply refused to continue and she found herself standing very still in a corridor that was neither here nor there, between the party she had left and the library she would not reach. Aldrich's study door was not fully closed. She could hear them clearly, not because she pressed her ear to the door or moved any closer, but because the old house carried sound in its walls the way old houses do, indifferently, without judgment. Mira said something she did not catch, and then laughed, and then Aldrich said her name, Ilara's name, in the voice he used when he wanted to be believed. "She's only a political marriage." His voice was low, and certain, and not unkind, which was somehow the worst part of it. He was not being cruel. He was stating a fact. He was correcting a misunderstanding. "You know what she is to me, Mira. You've always known what she is to me." A pause. The fire in the study shifted. "Mira, and after Hatton's claim is settled, Aldrich, then we reassess what the situation requires." Ilara stood in the corridor. She was aware of several things at once, which is what happens when something you have suspected for a very long time is confirmed in language. She was aware that her hands were completely still. She was aware that her breathing was steady and quiet and controlled. She was aware that she had been waiting, without fully knowing she was waiting, for exactly this, something concrete, something she could hold in both hands and look at clearly, because suspicion is a shadow and shadows are difficult to act on, but certainty is a different thing entirely. She was also aware that she did not want to cry. She examined this fact carefully, the way you examine something you have found on the ground and are not certain you recognize. She had thought, in the abstract, that if she ever heard it plainly, the grief would arrive all at once, enormous and immediate. But it did not. What arrived instead was something quieter and more durable. Something that had, perhaps, been building for 18 months, and had simply been waiting for a name. She adjusted the cuffs of her evening gloves. She turned. She walked back down the corridor toward the drawing room. Her footsteps made no sound on the stone. She returned to the party. She accepted a glass of wine from a passing servant. She stood near Lady Hatton and laughed at something the woman said, and the laugh came out exactly right, warm, appropriate, neither too much nor too little, and she thought, I have become very good at this. Dangerously good. Across the room, Aldrich returned some 20 minutes later and rejoined the gathering with the ease of a man who had simply stepped out for air. His face was composed. His cuffs were straight. He did not look at her, but he did not avoid looking at her, either, which was its own kind of information. She stayed until the appropriate hour. She said good night to the appropriate people. She went upstairs, and sat on the edge of her bed, and looked at the window, and let the night be what it was. She did not sleep for a long time. She was thinking. There was a letter. She had been keeping it for 11 months, not hidden, exactly, but placed with care, folded into the back of her writing desk beneath some correspondence her own father had sent her in the first year of marriage. Her father had been many things, distracted, occasionally absent, better with figures than with feeling. But he had been a careful man, and he had loved her in the way careful men love their daughters, quietly, and with information. The letter concerned the Voss family trust. It concerned, specifically, the document that Aldrich believed to be unique, the one that made Ilara's marriage the legal mechanism by which the trust dispute between himself and Hatton could be permanently resolved. Aldrich's solicitor had built the entire structure of the arrangement on that document's being singular. One copy, one guarantee, one marriage that served a single clean purpose. Her father had sent her a copy of a second document. An earlier one. One that, in the hands of a different solicitor, her family's firm, not the Voss firm, changed the picture considerably. She had known about it for 11 months. She had been waiting. Not for revenge. She wanted to be precise about this with herself, sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark. It was not revenge. Revenge required that you had been wronged by someone who had pretended otherwise, and Aldrich had never precisely pretended. He had been what he was from the beginning. She had chosen to hope for something more, and that was her own decision, and she was responsible for it, and she did not blame him for her hope. She blamed no one for it. It was simply a mistake, and she had made it, and now she was going to stop. She was going to stop waiting. She was going to stop performing. She was going to stop spending 18 months of her life in someone else's arrangement and begin, with whatever years remained, building her own. 3 days later, on a Sunday morning when the estate was quiet and most of the guests had departed, she wrote a letter to her family's solicitor. She asked for a meeting at his office in the city. She asked that he pull from the family records the correspondence between her father and the firm dated some 13 years prior, concerning the Voss Trust Clause. She asked that he prepare a summary of her independent legal standing in the current marriage contract given the existence of that earlier document. She sealed the letter herself. She sent it herself. She did not mention it to anyone. She was patient. She had always been patient. It was one of the things she was best at, and she had spent 18 months giving that quality to someone else's comfort. It was time she used it for herself. The meeting with the solicitor took place the following Thursday. He was a small, precise man who had known her father for 30 years and who looked at her across the desk with the expression of someone who has underestimated a person and is only now beginning to correct the error. She laid out what she knew. She asked the questions she needed answered. She listened carefully to the answers. She thanked him. She went home. Aldrich was at breakfast when she came down the following morning, a rare thing, his presence at breakfast, which typically he took in his study. He was reading the week's correspondence and had the comfortable, settled look of a man in a house that has always been his. Ilara sat down. Poured her tea. The servant left them. She reached into the small leather case she had brought to the table and removed the document, not the original, which was with her solicitor now, but a copy, crisp and clear, every word legible. She set it on the table beside his coffee cup. She said nothing. Aldrich looked down at the paper. He did not move for a moment. Then he picked it up. She watched him read it. She watched his eyes move across the lines once, and then again, more slowly the second time, and she watched the color change in his face, not dramatically, not the way it would happen on a stage, but quietly, like a sky when the light shifts behind clouds. He set the document down. He looked at her. She drank her tea. She did not say, "I was outside the door on Thursday evening." She did not say, "I have known you were not in love with me for 14 of the 18 months we have been married." She did not say, "You called me a political marriage to the woman you actually wanted, in your own house, behind a door you did not think to close properly." She said none of these things. She did not need to. The document said everything that needed saying, and it said it in language that was clear and permanent and could not be smiled at. Aldrich was quiet for a long time. Outside, the estate's grounds were silver and still, frost on everything, morning light coming in low and honest through the windows. A good house, she thought again. She had always liked it. She had decided, keep it, or rather, she would ensure that keeping it was among the terms, because among the many things that had changed in the last week, she had stopped assuming she would have to leave and started thinking carefully about what she intended to remain. When Aldrich spoke, his voice was measured. He was good at measured. She gave him that. He said, "Where did you get this?" It was not quite a question. It arrived flat, like a fact looking for confirmation. She said, "My father was a careful man." There was a silence between them that was different from all the other silences of their marriage. The previous silences had been performances, the absence of sound in a room still full of pretending. This one was real. This one was two people who had stopped pretending, who were sitting in a kitchen in the morning light, looking at each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. Aldrich set the document carefully on the table between them. He straightened it with one finger. "What do you want?" he said. And Ilara, who had been waiting 18 months to feel something concrete enough to act on, who had stood in a corridor and heard her own value described in 2 sentences, who had held a letter for 11 months without bitterness but with extraordinary patience, who had smiled at so many right moments that she had lost count, looked at him, and thought of everything she had given, and everything she had endured, and everything she had quietly taught herself about what she was worth, and then she told him. She told him exactly what she wanted. She had thought about it very carefully. She was not rushed. She did not raise her voice. She said each thing once, and clearly, and she did not apologize for any of it, and when she was finished she picked up her tea and waited. There were lawyers after that. And documents. And several conversations conducted in offices with good furniture and no warmth, in which everyone chose their words with great precision. Ilara sat through all of it. She had spent 18 months learning how to sit through things. She was exceptional at it. The arrangement that emerged was her arrangement. Not an inheritance of someone else's terms, her own, built from what she had earned and what the law afforded her and what a second document, kept carefully by a careful father, made possible. She came out of it with the estate's North properties. With her independence. With the particular quiet satisfaction of a woman who refused to let the story that was told about her in a corridor be the last word. She moved to the North house in early spring. It was smaller than the main estate. The gardens were wilder and less maintained, and the rooms were cold in a way that required actual fires, not just decorative ones. She found she did not mind. She had come to prefer things that were honest about what they were. She did not grieve the marriage. She had done that grieving, slowly, over months, a little at a time, while she was still inside it. By the time she left, there was nothing left to mourn, which was its own kind of gift. What she felt instead, walking into her own house on the first morning of spring, was something she had no precise word for. Not triumph. Not relief, exactly. Something quieter and steadier than either of those. The feeling of a woman who had been underestimated, and had waited, and had used the time well. She stood in her entrance hall. The morning light came through the windows in long clean lines across the floor. She was 31 years old. She had a house, and a solicitor she trusted, and a garden that would need considerable work, and a very particular smile she intended to retire immediately. She had no one to perform for. It was, she decided, the finest thing she had ever owned. She made herself a cup of tea. She stood at her own window. She looked at her own land. And for the first time in 18 months, she simply stood there, without adjusting anything, without preparing her face for anyone, without waiting for the right moment to arrive. The right moment, she had learned, does not arrive. You build it. Carefully. From what you have. And you hold it. She held it. End.